Hey, it is 2:02, so we're going to go ahead and jump right in and get started. Welcome everyone this afternoon to TPMA's Smart Take, where we're talking all about evaluation today, specifically looking at how evaluation can help drive future investment. We can switch to the next slide, please. My name is Maureen Hoffman. I'm a principal consultant at TPMA, working primarily in our evaluation services. And Bree Dines will also be presenting with me today. And we have Katie Batafrano and Mariah Taft also on the call who are going to help run the show and field questions. All of us work highly in our evaluation projects, so we're all here to support you today. If you do have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to throw those in the Q&A, and we will answer those at the end of our talk. So our goal today is to talk about how evaluation can help bring in more investment in the work that you're doing. So to start off with, to get everyone on the same page, I'll be giving a quick introduction to what is evaluation, some common types of evaluation. I might try to throw in a little plug and convince you that you already do some evaluation, whether you know it or not. And then we'll be diving into some specific examples of where we have seen evaluation playing a role in investment. So we'll have specific examples from higher education, community-based organizations, economic development, and workforce development. And then we'll wrap things up talking about kind of where do we go next? What happens after that? So next slide, please. There we go. So as I said, to get us all on the same page, I want to give a quick definition of what is evaluation. So evaluation is the collection and analysis of information about a program, whether that's the activities, the characteristics, participant outcomes, any aspect of the program, with a goal of assessing effectiveness, facilitating ongoing program improvement, and informing future decision making. So those three goals really are the key piece of evaluation, looking at effectiveness, program improvement, and informing decision making. Now, if you have been involved in evaluations in the past, you might be familiar with some of these terms here on the screen. A lot of evaluations, you might think of process or implementation evaluation, looking at the implementation of a program, or looking at outcomes and impact evaluations. But there are many other types and approaches to evaluation as well. So in addition to those three, you can also do program logic model or theory of change development. You can do evaluability assessment. So really actually taking a step back and looking at whether you're even prepared to do a full-scale evaluation, looking at the data you're collecting, looking at the information and the setup. You can do case studies can be a part of evaluation, developmental evaluation, which really looks at the program in its development from the infancy of a program and what decisions are being made to develop the program, maybe before you're ready to look at the outcomes. And then there are many, many other approaches and methods within evaluation as well. So even if you've never done an outcomes evaluation or an impact evaluation or any of those, things that you might typically think of as an evaluation, there's a good chance that you've actually done some sort of evaluative activity. Really, if you've spent any time looking at your program, looking at the initiatives that you're doing, and trying to identify if it's effective, that's evaluation. If you are collecting information to try to improve the program, that is a type of evaluation. So again, I told you I'm going to briefly try to convince you that you probably have already done some evaluation, whether or not you've, worked with a outside evaluator. But there's a lot of evaluative thinking that goes into just planning and running a program. So there's a lot of knowledge that you come into this with already about evaluation. Next slide, please. So turning to the investment side, evaluation can be really helpful for a number of things. Evaluation helps show what really works with your program, what's having positive impacts in the community. It also, as I mentioned, continuous improvement, encouraging continuous improvement throughout the life cycle of a program. Evaluation helps strengthen accountability and credibility by demonstrating the ability of your team to collect the necessary data that investors like to see. We also, as evaluators, can help ensure that we're not repeating past mistakes and we're learning and improving, which reduces risk when it comes to future funding because we learn, we move on, we get better. Evaluation helps inform strategic alignment between your program's activities and your larger organizational or community goals. So thinking again, it's about some of that logic modeling or theory of change work. So making sure that your program is working to support those ultimate goals of the organization. Evaluation helps to identify what works and what should be prioritized in long-term sustainability decisions. And it can help demonstrate returns on investment, looking at how funds are resulting in real positive impact. So you can take all of those things, and they're all in pieces of information that funders like to see. So you can use this in grant applications or various other funding applications, conversations with donors, um, attracting or making the case for public investment and so on. Funders like to know that you are a responsible steward of their investment, and that they're investing in a program that works and that you're able to say why and how it works. So with that in mind, we're now going to turn to 4 examples of where we've seen the role of evaluation in driving investment. These examples, as I mentioned, will come from higher education, community-based organizations, economic community development, and workforce development. So I'll turn it over to Bree for our first example.
All right, thanks, Maureen. Yeah, so our first example highlights a long 10 plus year evaluation partnership we've had with Miami-Dade College, one of the largest public college institutions. Our work with them has primarily focused on advanced technology programs and career pathways for their students, but also now, as things have progressed beyond just MDC students to other efforts too. As evaluators, we remain independent in terms of data collection and interpreting findings, focusing on direct usefulness in our evaluation. This can also look like ongoing thought partnership, especially in a longer relationship like we have with MDC. And that's using evaluation findings, throughout, not only throughout a program's process, but throughout, broader, more kind of braided efforts. Findings listed on the slide here, some of the things that evaluations have surfaced, there's always challenges to address. There's always, some successes to build on. Some of those findings have been, sector partnerships between the college and employers, project-based learning, and what faculty need to integrate rapidly evolving technology as well as we're all experiencing. Next slide, please. So the impacts of this, evaluation has really provided evidence for supporting just kind of a domino effect of additional integrated projects, now scaling even to a national level with the National Applied AI Consortium. And really taking advantage of the acceleration of funding and the need to support AI readiness and applied tech career pathways. So findings have contributed to kind of the next level of program development. Again, what to prioritize, what has worked well in the past, how can the next level of funding really grow these efforts, help shape key elements of additional grant proposals. So, findings from an evaluation of one project can help you determine what comes next. And really, this is relevant in any programming space that needs insight and evidence to support investment. I'll kick it back to Maureen for the next couple examples.
Great, thanks. So our next example comes from the world of community-based or nonprofit organizations. So evaluation we find can be really useful even when you might have a limited budget uh, for for evaluation. It can really help set organizations up for future funding. So community-based organizations may not always have an evaluation budget built into their grant or their funding, unlike the MDC example that Bree just shared, where that evaluation budget was built into those grants. But these organizations can still incorporate and benefit from evaluation. So for example, we worked with an AmeriCorps program based in central Pennsylvania, and based on their funding type, they weren't required to hire an outside evaluator, but they were looking to increase the rigor of their data collection and evaluation in order to set themselves up for higher levels of AmeriCorps funding. So we worked with this program twice. The first time, we did a review of their existing data tools and helped identify places where additional data might be needed. We created new evaluation tools, data collection tools, and trained the staff on how to use them to capture what was really being accomplished by the program. We also worked with staff to revise their logic model to make sure that it was accurately reflecting the real program activities and goals of the organization. The program then brought us back a couple years later, once they had had time to actually implement the new data collection processes and tools, to conduct a more rigorous impact evaluation. And that evaluation was looking at the impact of AmeriCorps service on student reading levels. So that evaluation, we found that during years in which AmeriCorps members were serving in the schools, students had statistically significant increases in reading scores compared with comparable similar students without AmeriCorps service. Next slide, please. So coming out of this, from phase one, those data collection tools that we developed are still in use today, 8 years later. Work like this really allows organizations to collect better data to document and improve their programs, even with minimal outside investment. So, in that case, we didn't spend multiple years doing an evaluation and working with them. It was a much more limited engagement, learning about their tools and their needs and setting them up for data collection. This also set them up for it did set them up for a more in-depth evaluation in the future, which we did in our second round of work with the program. So while the impact evaluation was not required by their funding, they wanted to demonstrate their commitment to high quality evaluation and set themselves up for future funding opportunities by building a stronger evidence base showing the positive impact of their members' service. At the time, they had identified having a lack of a rigorous evaluation approach as a limitation to receiving a higher funding level competitive grant. So they used all of this evidence in their most recent application for a higher level of funding through an AmeriCorps competitive grant, which hopefully we'll hear that they've received. The application was just due this month, so still pending there. Next slide, please. And then shifting now to an example from economic and community development, we worked with the Indiana Housing and Community Development Authority to conduct a mixed methods research study of IHCDA's permanent supportive housing portfolio. The goal was to build an understanding of how effectively public investment in housing supports long-term stability for those residents. In the evaluation, we combined focus groups, surveys, and a large amount of administrative data to measure housing retention, service needs, and resident outcomes. The study demonstrated that it demonstrated an increase in housing stability among permanent supportive housing residents. It also provided the agency with demographic information about who was statistically most likely to remain housed and who might need a little bit of extra support for that. The study also demonstrated the return on investment for residents in permanent supportive housing. Next slide, please. This study provided evidence of participant retention, length of stay, and service needs. This resulted in a better understanding of the needed services, which can help prioritize funding and decisions and demonstrate funding and financial needs for those services. The return on investment findings provided further justification for the program's outcomes and impacts. The study provided evidence for the agency to help position permanent supportive housing as infrastructure that helps meet housing, healthcare, workforce, and public safety needs for residents, which can be used during funding requests or justifications or when communicating with potential partners in the community as well. In addition to this housing example, we also see opportunities to conduct evaluation work with other economic development or community development initiatives. For example, in the spaces of childcare initiatives, small business ecosystem supports could benefit from this work. And then various economic development focused grants, EDA grants, HUD grants, things like that. Next slide, please. And I'm going to turn it back over to Bree for our last example.
All right. So in the realm of workforce development, we have done a couple projects with Employ Indy. One kind of we had recurring for a while, anchored in American Job Centers and one-stop operator services, and another that's happening right now about college coaching. The evaluation work with the American Job Center, one-stop operator services contributed to kind of just understanding evolving needs of job seekers and frontline staff. And it's a difficult space. People need work. They're struggling. And staff trying to help people in sometimes difficult labor market and economic landscapes. The interesting thing about this evaluation work was wasn't required or really a normal aspect of the one-stop operator services that we had been providing Employ Indy, but it became a really useful part of the process that fed into other aspects of that work that included, supporting the community of practice and staff development and getting a deeper perspective on job seekers' experiences so they could do the work better. Some of the findings that we saw were, tech solutions. There's always some new tech solution on the horizon, but it's got to always be paired with relationship-based navigation to avoid some fragmentation that participants were experiencing. Getting partners together in a better way so that the funding being distributed in the region could be better leveraged together. And then, the college coaching being valuable to just as a basic, first stop for holistic support. Next slide, please. Okay, yeah. So this, some of the impacts, evaluators love when we get to see findings applied. And I was privileged enough to be in the room for a really cool organizational strategy session with program folks to talk about what they could do based on these findings and how they could prioritize resources in a pretty uncertain funding landscape. And it also helped us in our work supporting them to improve how this ecosystem connected and to kind of revitalize some standard practices for better partner collaboration. So, having a partner speed dating or speed networking event, was maybe a more effective use of funding sometimes than some of the standard practices where folks are kind of zoning out. So this just kind of catalyze more effective relationships. But the idea was surfaced through that evaluation activity, and then was able to support other pieces. The coaching program being evaluated now is directly tied to aligning to some best practices that funders look for. So we will be using findings to determine, what's working well, but also those gaps. And that shows how honest, independent evaluation isn't just to kind of make a case that everything's hunky dory, but it's also helpful to say, oh, we recognize, oh, this is where our gaps are, and it justifies, one, you can show you are doing some good work and making an impact, but maybe you could be even better if you had some more resources to address those gaps. All right. So next slide. All right. So what's next? Some of you on the call may be interested in what opportunities are out there right now that could also benefit from robust evaluation. We've listed some big ones here, and we'll share a more detailed snapshot out to you all after the call via email. Of course, this isn't a whole funding scan, but something to get you exploring and in touch with what the possibilities are. Here at TPMA, we offer, typical types of evaluation that Maureen has discussed, but also, the work that goes around evaluation. That's preparing a program framework, building capacity for evaluating programming, deploying large-scale public input surveys on the front end to just understand needs to, what kind of programming is appropriate here. What do people need? Other things like economic impact studies go beyond program specific evaluation, but help determine, how programming has larger rippling effects, economically in a region. So with that, we will wrap up, but we'll have our contact info in the chat, and it's on this slide for follow up. At this point, I think we'll just address any questions folks have put in the Q&A. And thank you all so much for joining us.
All right, thank you, Bree and Maureen. So looking at some of these questions here, we have about 6 minutes left. I think we can go ahead and start with, especially pulling from your evaluation experience you described in those great examples. What advice do you have for an organization completing an evaluation for the first time?
Jump in there, make sure I unmute myself. So we work with a lot of organizations that are doing their very first evaluation that's never worked with an evaluator before. So I know it can be a little bit overwhelming. I feel like there's a lot of terminology that gets thrown around, and you're like, I don't know what any of that means. But I think there's a lot to be said for taking a step back and thinking through, like, why are you doing an evaluation? And if it's part of it's because you have to, because of a grant requirement, that's an acceptable thing to say. But I think it's really helpful for your evaluator to understand what you want to learn. So like, what, from your own perspective, why would you want to do an evaluation? You know, and if it's your first one, I think it can be really helpful to limit the scope of the evaluation, especially if you're maybe doing an internal evaluation and you're kind of trying to do it yourself. Focus on a specific aspect of your program. Don't try to evaluate, 40 years of programming across 50 sites. Maybe do a pilot study, look at a single question of, what kind of impact is this having on student reading levels. Start there and get it kind of under your feet first, and then you can expand. And don't worry if it's not perfect the first time, but we're all about continuous improvement here. Bree, did you have anything you wanted to add? You're muted though.
No, that was great. Thanks, Maureen.
All right, very good advice. All right, we have another question. So you talked a lot about some of the positive findings and impact, but also you might uncover some things for improvement or some other challenges. So with that in mind, someone asked, how do we use evaluation findings without hurting ourselves if the results are mixed?
Yeah, I can take that. I think, spoke to that a little bit, but even part of the case for funding and greater investment is that there is a need, right? And so, evaluation can provide nuance around, okay, there's not just need and there's not just complete success where we don't need anything anymore. But it can kind of thread that line um and help you understand and articulate, okay, why did something not work, and that knowledge and being able to demonstrate that knowledge can help you target what you work on next. And that is a good case for more investment, because funders see that you're reflective. They see that you're able to, you're not just on autopilot, you're thinking critically about the work you do on an ongoing basis, and evaluation can really support that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, I think we just have one more quick question, then we'll sign off for the day. So, someone was inquiring if TPMA could help with their data collection, but they did ask, what if their data systems, their data collection methods currently aren't as top tier, as great yet? Could we still assist while that's in progress?
Yeah. Well, answer the first question is absolutely. We can definitely help with data collection. As I mentioned with the AmeriCorps program, our entire first project that we did with that program was helping figure out the data collection. So it's very, very common to have imperfect data. That's one, it doesn't scare us, and it's very normal. I think it's a process, and it's just really good to be honest from the start about where you're at with your data collection. If you're working with us, it's really helpful for us to understand what limitations there might be. And maybe you're not even aware of what those all might be. Like maybe you know some of them, but there might be some that you hadn't even realized at the time, and that's totally fine. We are very comfortable and experienced in working with incomplete data, and we can having limited or incomplete data doesn't necessarily mean you can't do an evaluation right now. I think that's something that we can always look at and assess what's possible and what isn't. Um, Part of our jobs is to help collect data and figure out what's needed for the evaluation. So whether it's data that you already have or don't have, we can help collect that. We can help put together new data tools for collecting things moving forward to make sure that we get you what you need. And so if you do want some help with your data collection, I highly recommend reaching out to us with our emails that are in the chat.
All right, perfect timing. Yep. Any last closing words before we all sign off?
Just thank you so much again for joining us today. And just really want to leave with that message that evaluation is something that you probably are already doing on a certain level, and it can really help propel you forward in terms of communicating to the community and to potential funders the value of the work that you're doing and the need for the work that you're doing, and hopefully get you some more investment so you can keep doing great work.